we'll give them just a minute or two, Kim, to come in the room because it takes a while for them to all load.
Sure, thanks, Dan.
And then I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Pathologists Overseas ASCP Quality Management Systems course, a virtual live course being offered to all of you in Africa. We thank you so much for joining us this week for personnel, which is going to be given by Kim Lewis. Please remember that if you have a question during the session, you can use the Q&A box, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Please use this to ask questions or make any comments during the presentation. If you have a technical problem, please use the chat box located in the lower left part of your screen to ask us in the background to help you with that issue. There are no polling questions in today's presentation, but there will be a case at the end. So please prepare your questions and ask them in the Q&A box, and we will get to those as we move forward. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim Lewis, who's going to talk to us about personnel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Milner, and a very good, I guess it's early evening for most of us in Africa, and a very good morning to our colleagues in the US. As Dan mentioned, my name is Kim Lewis, and a little bit of background from me. My background is MSc in medical microbiology, and I've worked in public and private practice, in public health. I'm currently based in South Africa, in a little place called Pringle Bay. You can find it on the map just. And currently, I'm doing consultancy work. I've been a consultant for the last 16 years, working for various organizations such as WHO, CDC, ASCP, APHL, FIND, and so on. And my goal has always been to help to build capacity and sustainable laboratory programs together with the Ministry of Health in all the countries that I have worked in. I have many passions. One of my personal passions is West African drumming. I am mad about African drumming, and I have many drums, and we play a lot at home with a group. And one of my other passions is QMS. And I always tell the same joke that if you take a blood sample from me, you will definitely find the quality management system in my blood. It's been in my blood for a long, long time. And so it's definitely a passion of mine. I'm also, many of you might be familiar with SLAMTA and SLIPTA trainings. And I'm also a master SLAMTA trainer, as well as a master SLIPTA auditor. So that's a little bit of background about me, and more than enough. And let's get started today with our session, which is personnel. I'm not sure how many sessions you have gone through yet, but I know that there have been various sessions. And in this particular session today, we are going to go through personnel together. So without further ado, let's continue. Please, as Dr. Milner mentioned, if you do have any questions, please type them in the box and we will certainly get to them at the end of this presentation. So here we go. We start off with a scenario. You are a laboratory manager. One of your two senior technologists has been temporarily reassigned to another laboratory. Your other senior technologist is sick, and the remaining two have not read malaria smears since their initial training several years ago. This morning, you received 20 malaria smear requests. As you are unable to ensure accurate testing, you must notify test requesters that the testing will be delayed. And so as a lab manager, or perhaps you are a pathologist in a manager role in the lab, how are we going to address this scenario? What needs to be done first, and what needs to be put in place to prevent this situation from happening again? So this is the scenario. Please keep it in mind, be thinking about it as we go through the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we will come back to this scenario and work through it together. The learning objectives for this session are as follows. We would like you to be able to describe management's roles and responsibilities regarding personnel management. Establish a program to verify employee competency. Improve employees' competency. Identify potential sources of employee performance problems, and to be able to implement and maintain personnel records. And here we are, the 12 essential elements of the quality management system. By now, this diagram should be very familiar to you. And we see that personnel is one of these quality system essentials. You will also notice that there are lines between each of these quality system essentials, and that means that they are all intertwined, they are all connected. Each of these components does not operate in a vacuum. There is often overlap between one quality system essential and one or more of the other quality system essentials. And that is what makes up the whole quality management system. So personnel does not stand alone. Laboratory staff. The first point here, that laboratory's greatest asset. Personnel are the laboratory's greatest asset. And we can tend to forget this if we are managers and we are working in a stressed environment. Our workload is very heavy, and it's always seems like our priority is to get the test results out. And obviously we want good quality test results. However, if we don't have the appropriate personnel and adequate personnel in place, then really there will not be a laboratory and there will be no testing. And so it's really, really important that we address personnel management. The laboratory staff are critical to quality. it's important that we have the right person doing the right work. So we want to make sure that they are adequately trained in the tasks that they are doing in order to provide quality in the laboratory. The laboratory professionals are also partners in public health. We work very closely, have close relationships, in constant communication with other health workers in the medical field. And not last but not least, a lot of our laboratory staff are qualified professionals. They come with certain qualifications, whether it's diplomas, higher diplomas, degrees, multiple degrees. And so our laboratory staff need to be cherished. And we need to also have a program in place to keep the staff, to retain the staff. I know that in many countries, this is a big problem. I've seen it in so many countries where people leave, especially leave the public sector to go and work in the private sector, or to go and work in for other organizations, other countries. And it's really important for us to be able to hold on to our laboratory professionals. Here's a diagram of what personnel management involves. There are many aspects, there are many processes that make up this quality system essential. First of all, the lab staff, everybody needs a job description. Everybody, from the cleaners to the laboratory workers to the lab assistants, the quality officers, everybody needs a job description. When new hires come into the laboratory, it is critical for them to have a good, comprehensive orientation. A bad orientation can leave a new staff member floundering, feeling overwhelmed, bewildered, and sometimes so unhappy that they would almost leave before they've started the job. Of course, we have to train our staff in all the tasks that they are listed in their job descriptions. And training, we know, is not sufficient. We have to be able to deem our staff competent to carry out the tasks that they have been trained in. Continuing education is also really, really important, because we do not want our staff to stagnate. We want to keep their interests alive. We want to keep them up to date with new techniques and new ideas. And also, if in your country, if you have a medical body or board and the qualified staff are required to be registered with this board, then often continuing education is a requirement for re-registration of being a member of the official board. Mm-hmm. Lastly, performance appraisals. This is something that is often it's overlooked because it seems to waste time, and yet it's one of the most valuable opportunities for a manager and a staff member to have that really important one-on-one time together that perhaps might not usually happen. And all of these will require their own processes and their own SOPs. And when we go back to our quality manual, and in our quality manual, we talk of personnel management, there needs to be policy statements for these aspects. And then we need to have specific SOPs for each of these processes. Motivation. Motivated employees are more committed to their work. Now, we know, and especially in developing countries across Africa and the rest of the world, that we do not always have the extra funds available to give to our staff. And money is also not the real answer. Money can only take us a certain way. You know, when we look at all the famous football players and soccer players and how much money they earn, and you wonder how happy they really are, because we hear of all these terrible things that happen to them and the things they do. And, you know, money has not brought them happiness, and it does not motivate them. And it's the same with our laboratory staff. Money does not always motivate. And what motivates one person is often very different to what motivates another person. And so, for example, some employees really like being praised for when they are doing good work. They want to know that you have noticed their good work. Don't let it go unnoticed. Recognition for working late or coming in on a weekend or going that extra mile, as we say, taking on a project, or really something that is beyond their actual scope. There should be some kind of recognition for these staff, you know, for your star, especially for your star players. But of course, everybody wants to be recognized for the work that they do. Everybody wants to feel like they belong and that they are important. In some places, we're fortunate enough where we are able to provide some kind of benefits. Maybe it's a salary increase, maybe it's a promotion, a job promotion, maybe they get to go to a laboratory conference, or some other kind of training. Perhaps the person would appreciate some flexible time. And of course, there are so many things that we can think of that are non-monetarian ways that we can motivate our staff. And it's important for us to know our staff. And when we know our staff, then we also get to know what motivates them. Because as I mentioned, what motivates that person might not motivate another person. And perhaps even in yourself, when you look at some of these aspects of motivators, you will, a couple will resonate with yourself. So please do not underestimate just a simple recognition in a staff meeting, or perhaps you give somebody a star, or any little thing that actually goes a long way is always, it's appreciated. So we do know that motivation comes from within ourselves, but there are definitely aspects as listed here that can help to give us that little push and to help that fire in our belly to burn even more and to motivate us even more. Job descriptions, it says in ISO 15189, the current version 2012, laboratory management shall have job descriptions that define qualifications and duties for all personnel. And as I'm mentioning this now, I hope that you are asking yourselves, do we have job descriptions for all of our staff? Are their duties clearly laid out? If you ever want to go for accreditation, certainly for medical testing laboratories, then assessors will definitely be looking for job descriptions. And also, if a person does not have a job description, how on earth are they supposed to know what it is they are supposed to be doing? And if people don't know what they are supposed to be doing, then what do you think will happen? They will probably decide for themselves what they think they should be doing. And then we're really going to get into all kinds of trouble. So job descriptions are really important. And when we get a new employee on board, we really, really need to take care of them. And we don't go into detail here about the hiring process, but I just wanted to make mention of when we do hire that we follow a correct process, written procedure on how to hire the correct person for the appropriate person for the correct job. I have one little story. Years ago, many years ago, I was working as a manager in a public health lab in the UK. And we were hiring for a laboratory assistant. And part of the specifications that we wrote for this hire was ideally we wanted the person to have some kind of laboratory background, that they have worked somehow in a laboratory before. And our potential hires who were interviewed, most of them indeed had a little bit, sometimes more than others, experience in working in a laboratory, even though they were not qualified medical technologists. And I remember sitting in this interview, and there was an Irish woman, and I don't even know how she got shortlisted, but this woman was being interviewed, and she was currently at that time working in a shoe shop. And so she was helping people to try on shoes, and she was selling shoes. But there was something in this woman, the way she was motivated. She had the fire in the belly, and she don't want to be a shoe lady. I want to do something that matters. I think if I get this job, I'm going to be doing work that really matters. I want to learn, I want to grow. And she was so enthusiastic. In the end, Elaine was her name. Elaine, we gave her the job. And you know, it was the best decision that we've ever made. Within no time at all, Elaine had picked things up. She was as bright as a button. She was very clever. And as time went on, she almost became the unofficial manager of the laboratory. If you wanted to know anything, everybody went to Elaine. So sometimes when we're hiring people, we need to have a really open mind, a broad mind, and kind of think outside of the box sometimes in order to get that special person that we want for the job. It's not always just about the qualifications and the experience. Anyway, my apologies, I digressed a little bit there. Let's go back to the new employee who is now been hired and is in the laboratory. They have a job description, and in that job description, there are certain specific tasks and duties that they are expected to fulfill, and they need to be trained. Then they need to be deemed competent in order to carry out their tasks. And if necessary, they also would need some retraining in some cases. So that's on the right-hand side of this slide. And on the left-hand side, we have what goes on during the orientation of new staff. So let's take a look at that appropriately. And so when new lab staff come into our lab, they need to follow an orientation program. And this program should be formally laid out. Perhaps there is a checklist that has to be filled in by the new lab hire, as well as the supervisor or the lab manager. And it will cover all areas in and around the laboratory. So first of all, the lab person needs to be made comfortable. They need to be introduced to everybody. They need to know the basic policies of the laboratory. What are the starting times, tea breaks, lunch breaks? They need to be familiar and to have read and understood important documents, such as the quality manual or the safety manual. And they need to understand the organization that they are working in. So who do they report to? Are there any people that are reporting to them? Where do they fit in the organization? What is the vision and the mission of the organization? And as I say this, I wonder if you know what your vision and mission is for the organization that you work for. The new hires need to understand everything about the lab. So they need to know where to find things. So which area are they working in? Which fridge is the clean fridge for getting kits and reagents? Which is the dirty fridge where samples get stored? Where do they go and get more supplies? Where's the storeroom? Where's the tea room? And very importantly, where's the tea room and where do they have their lunch breaks? And they need to be able to know the entire layout of the laboratory, and also to have read and understood the important SOPs that are relevant to them. An orientation program usually can take about 3 to 6 months, because it also covers and includes the training and the competency aspects. This is all part of the orientation. We cannot expect somebody to come into the lab and to start working unless they have been trained first. So a good orientation can make a huge difference on whether you hold on to that new hire, or in 6 months' time, are they already looking for another job? This we have already mentioned. In the job description, needs to have details of the specific tasks, and training needs to occur. Training and then to be competency assessed, that their training has been approved and they have been deemed competent to carry out such tasks. And so they receive competency recognition. In the old ISO 9001 series, which is mostly about QMS actually, it didn't really include competency as part of the orientation and training and so on of new staff. But certainly in 15189, there is great emphasis on competency of staff and also competency of testing. But this is all about personnel. I mentioned that there would be standardized checklists or forms that would be used for competency assessments, and these would be filled in often by the new hire as well as the supervisor, and there would be a list of areas that have been covered for the new hire. This, the competency assessment documentation for orientation or for a specific procedure, all these documents need to be recorded and kept in our personnel files, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. In terms of the competency assessment, we need to be very clear about how, who, what, and when will these assessments occur. And there would be a policy in the quality manual about competency assessments, and there will be specific SOPs on how to conduct competency assessments. And in this specific SOP, it will cover who will conduct the assessment. Is it the supervisor working on the bench? Is it the lab manager? Is it the storekeeper? Depending on what the lab staff are being competency assessed on. And exactly, very clearly in the checklist, what is going to be assessed and when will these assessments occur. This will be stated clearly, all this information in the SOP. More often than not, we, in the quality manuals and policies that I've seen, competency assessment is usually done on the new hires, and then refresher, repeat competency assessments are done periodically, often annually, because if we are not reassessed for our competency, then often it's like driving a car. Over time, we pick up bad habits. So instead of holding the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, which is what my driving instructor taught me, now I'm holding it with one hand, and on the other hand, I'm doing fiddling or something. And instead of turning my gears down to 2 when I turn a corner, oh, now I'm doing it in 3rd gear, and so on. So we pick up bad habits over time. And it's the same in the laboratory. We don't mean to do it, but we can pick up these subtle bad habits, and having reassessments to reassess competency really make sure that we don't pick up any bad habits in the laboratory. We've mentioned about training, the normal training and competency in the laboratory, but we also have other aspects of training, including cross-training. And this would be where laboratories, once they are competent in one area, then they are also trained and deemed competent in another area. So let's say that a lab staff member is competent in reading malaria smears. Once they are deemed competent and they've worked in that area for a while, then perhaps they are also trained and deemed competent in reading TB smears. And in that way, it means that as the lab manager, you can utilize that staff member now in two separate sections. So cross-pollination, cross-training is very, very good. And it also helps to keep the laboratory running if there are any troubles with short staff and so on. Continuing education is so important. It's important for, especially for qualified laboratory personnel, professionals, to keep learning and to keep growing. Once we start working, that should not end. We need to keep learning. We need to learn what's going on. What are the latest techniques? What are the latest things that are happening? What interesting projects are happening, even in our laboratory? And as I mentioned, continuing education is often a requirement for re-registration with official medical boards. In this day and age, there are so many different ways that we can continue our education. It can be anything from during a staff meeting or a journal meeting. Somebody presents a paper, perhaps it's their own publication, or perhaps it's some other interesting publication. Perhaps there are regular on-site trainings for different kinds of aspects. Maybe they are fortunate to go off-site and have off-site trainings, attending lectures, attending conferences. And of course, you know, over the last year with the COVID pandemic, we've had to really rethink how we do so much, including training and education. And there are so many online courses that are available now, such as this very good training course that that you are taking part in. And I do hope, I don't know what the setup is, but I really do hope that if you have participated in all of these modules, that perhaps you would get some sort of recognition or a certificate or something, and that would then also go in your personnel file. And it would also perhaps serve as providing you some points, if it's a point system that you need for re-registration of your board. Performance appraisals. This is something that so many people don't like. They think it takes too much time. They're far too busy. I remember working in a lab many years ago, and it was time for my appraisal, and it was in the old traditional way of doing appraisals, where it was once a year you would get the opportunity, if you were lucky, to meet with your manager, and then that would be it until the next year. And the shortest appraisal I ever had was walking into my manager's office, and he looked at me above his glasses and he said to me, "Yes, Kim, what can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm here for my appraisal." And he went, "Oh, really? Well, yes, I think everything is good. Everything is fine. Thank you very much for coming in." And that was the end of my appraisal. I actually, even in those days, and I'm going back now about 20 years, even in those days, I was really, really shocked to have, that was no appraisal at all. So appraisals are opportunities for the manager and the staff member to come together and discuss the performance of that staff member, to evaluate the staff member, and to come to some kind of agreement on the way forward, maybe setting some goals, some objectives for this staff member. Of course, there will again be a standardized checklist, and there would be an SOP on how to conduct performance appraisals. It should be behind closed doors where there's no interruption. When you have appraisals, in the old traditional way of doing them, as I mentioned, you would sit with your staff, meet with the staff only once a year. But a more modern approach that works much better is to meet on an annual basis and to set goals and objectives and to go through your checklist, but perhaps to meet every quarter or so during the year and evaluate the person's performance, so that it doesn't wait until one whole year. The time between that you have between the staff member and the manager is precious time. And of course, you're going to cover the usual areas that are listed here. You're going to make sure that the staff member is competent and currently competent, up to date, that the staff members are observing and adhering to the policies in the quality manual, they are observing safety measures, that they are communicating and being courteous to customers, that they are punctual, they arrive on time, they leave on time, they do not have extended lunch breaks, and so on. And generally, do they exercise professional behavior within the workplace? So these are all aspects that get covered in the performance appraisal. But it is also an opportunity for a staff member to be heard by the manager. So does that staff member, do they have any grievances? You know, I've been sitting on this TB smear bench for the last year. I'm so sick and tired of reading TB smears. Can you please put me somewhere else before I die? And so then the manager knows, because maybe the manager hasn't even thought about this. And then they can go, "Oh yeah, Kim has been doing TB smears for so long. Let's put her onto another bench that we can train her on and make sure she's competent." Maybe a staff member is going through some difficult times, and maybe they want to share some confidential information. That's also a good opportunity. Maybe a staff member needs to be motivated. Maybe they want to continue and do a higher educational program or enroll in some educational program. they might have their own aspirations that the lab manager needs to hear. And this is an opportunity for the lab manager also to see how they can accommodate the needs of their staff. And so it works both ways. The person, the staff member, is evaluated and assessed, but also it's an opportunity for them to put things on the table and perhaps lay out some areas for their own improvement and their own growth. Of course, when we do these appraisals, the person being appraised and the person appraising complete the same checklist, and then they compare notes when they come together. And if there are discordant findings, then those are also discussed and perhaps improvements agreed upon. So maybe I'm not even aware that I'm taking 1.5 hours for lunch and lunch is only an hour, but the manager has picked up on that. And so then that is something obviously that I would need to work and improve on. So performance appraisals are really important. They're opportunities for both sides, manager and the staff member. Performance appraisals are formal. That means that they are part of our lab policy. They are a must. They are part of our quality manual. It's also stated in the ISO 15189. These meetings need to be regular, as I mentioned, not just once a year, but let's have those meetings more regularly, maybe on a quarterly basis, and of course, according to the SOP. These meetings should be constructive and positive. When your staff member leaves the appraisal meeting, we really want them to feel good about themselves and about the work that they are doing, even if there are adjustments that they need to make, even if there are improvements. Let's try and leave that meeting on a positive, constructive note. Making sure that you both fill in the same checklist is a way of making sure that the appraisal is objective and so it's fair. And all objectives, all notes of things that need to happen or have happened, or evidence, is all documented in the appraisal report. And where do we keep these appraisal reports? In the person's personnel file. And where do we keep the personnel files? Well, they are confidential, so they need to be in a secure place. And I think we come to that in just, here we go. Personnel records, they are confidential. It doesn't matter what information is in there. It's all confidential and should be kept in a safe place under lock and key in the manager's office. Sometimes some of the information might be in the human resource department. They don't all have to be in the same place, but there are certain documents that you would expect to find in a personnel folder in a laboratory. And these are things like the job description, the CV of the staff, their appraisals, their competency assessments, and any trainings that they have been to. And so, in summary, personnel management is critical to success of a quality management system. We said that personnel are our biggest asset. And we really, really have to remember that. And we need to make a conscious effort to make our personnel feel like they are valued and needed. We need a retention program for our staff. If we don't look after our staff, they will leave. And I'm sure you have seen that happening, whether it's in your current organization or another organization. But we see that happening. And it's really sad, you know, it's sad, especially to lose really good people that have great potential. We've spoken about job descriptions and that they need to be accurate, and the tasks and the duties for that staff member need to be clearly described. The staff need to go through a standard orientation program. They need to be trained. They need to be competent. And we need to be able to hold on to our staff and address problems when they occur. We can't ignore our staff when there are problems. And really by now we should be having an open door policy where somebody from the lab, excuse me, can come into your office at any time and say, you know, do you have 5 minutes to spare? I need some time, please. The key messages. Personnel are the most important resource in the laboratory. Without our personnel, there is no testing. If there is no testing, there is no laboratory. If there's no laboratory, we are not able to care and look after our customers and our patients. Managers must create an environment that will fully support all laboratory personnel in order to maintain a high quality of laboratory performance. And so we have to really look after the needs of our laboratory staff. Remember that we are all different. What works for one person might not work for another person. So you have to really know your staff, what makes them tick. And then also to have a conducive work environment. We spend so much of our time at work, often more time than we do with our own families. And so it's really important that we have a conducive environment, a friendly environment that we work in, where we feel like we all belong and that we are part of a team. We're not working individually, we're working as a team to provide quality from our laboratory. And of course, the last point we've spoken about, which is the continuing education. It's vital to personnel competency, but it's also vital to the personnel, just their general growth in the laboratory. It's just horrible to see somebody stagnate in the lab. The last thing you want is a laboratory full of staff of what we call dead wood. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term, dead wood, but there's not much that you can do with dead wood, except for maybe make a fire. So we don't want dead wood in the laboratory. We want dynamic people who are happy working for our organization in our laboratory, and that they are recognized for what the work that they do, and that they are producing quality work in the laboratory. So before we go back to the scenario, which was right at the very, very beginning of this presentation, I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask Dr. Milner to please open up the session for any questions or anything that you would like some clarification on, or perhaps you'd like to share an experience from your own laboratory, you are most welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. So we do have a couple of questions. The first is, hand in hand with staff motivation is staff discipline. What kind of measures have been successfully used in your experience to address disciplinary measures while trying to keep staff motivated?
That's a very, very good question. And it's a question that I don't like, because I don't like having to deal with disciplinary measures. They make me feel very uncomfortable. And I suspect that many lab managers feel the same way. It really is not a pleasant experience having to take disciplinary action on any of our staff. But of course, this does happen from time to time. The important thing to remember here is that we are not totally responsible for disciplining our personnel. So let's say that, I don't know, let's say that somebody has a drinking problem, they come to work and they're smelling of alcohol, and we sit down with them as managers and we have a conversation, and the person says, no, I'll be fine, I won't do it again. And the person keeps doing it. Then what do we do? Well, the first thing is that if we have a problem with the personnel and we cannot resolve it ourselves, we shouldn't try to keep resolving it or try to keep taking measures to try and resolve it. We have to accept that we have done what we can within our limitations. And then I would pass that particular problem to the human resource department. And that is really one of their important roles, is taking disciplinary action. Now, from one country to another, it's going to vary, but in each HR department of the Ministry of Health or any organization, one of the roles and the responsibilities of HR is taking disciplinary action. So if you find that there is a problem in your lab and you've tried to resolve it with a person and it's not working out, then you need to escalate that to HR. And again, there should be a policy that is provided to managers. There should be a policy that comes from HR. And that should also contain an SOP outlining step by step what the procedure is in taking disciplinary action. So again, it will vary in different countries. In some places, they will say 3 verbal warnings, 3 written warnings, and then notice or something like that. But this, you don't suck this information out of the air. It's whatever the instructions are in your disciplinary procedures. But just to emphasize again, that if we have problem people, and fortunately it doesn't happen very often, but all of us at some stage will go through this, and if we cannot resolve it, please do not take this upon yourself then to try and resolve. That is not up to us. We need to pass the problem up the line. So I hope that makes sense. I hope I've answered the question, or is there something that you wanted to add?
No, I think that's great, Kim. So we have quite a few more, which is fine. So let's just keep going. And again, we can do as many of these because we have plenty of time. So who should conduct training and competency assessment for senior staff, such as the lab management and the lab director?
That's also a really, really good question. So in different countries, again, have adopted, you know, we think we're all one lab, but yet there are so many ways. I don't know if you've heard of the term, there are different ways to skin the cat or to pluck the feathers from a chicken. But training of lab managers and competency are done in different ways depending on the country and depending on what the policy and what the procedure says. Now, training of lab managers. I know that there are many different lab management training courses. I know that APHL, for example, does an excellent 1-week training program on FLLM. ASCP might also have something. There could be some online courses that are approved courses by the hospital administrator or by the medical board or by the overall laboratory director. And so there are many ways that the lab manager can be trained and deemed competent. In some cases, there might be some training that the lab manager can receive, for example, from the hospital director or from the hospital administrator or from the HR department, because there are all different aspects that the lab manager require in order to carry out their duties. But in terms of overall training and competency, I would recommend a formal course on lab management. And certainly I know the FLLM very well, and part of that also contains a competency element to it.
Great.
Thank you.
So there were 2 questions that I think are about resources that I'm just going to read them out so we can note to make sure we share those. One is, can you share training and competency assessment checklists? And can you share some mandatory and voluntary training requirements for lab personnel? Actually, I guess that second one you could answer, Kim. So the first one, we can share the training and competency assessment checklist with the group via our email to everyone. But the second question is, can you share some mandatory and voluntary training requirements for lab personnel?
Well, mandatory training requirements are really related back to that individual's job description and what their specific duties and specific tasks are. And that will determine what the personnel needs to be trained on and deemed competent. I'm not sure if I'm answering this question or if I'm answering a different question.
I think that maybe they're asking for, well, you know what, let's jump into some other questions, because I think there's some more specific questions that might get to this. So for example, Clever Chisinga, who's one of our very active participants, has asked, I've observed that most job descriptions are all general. Should it be that like that even in specialized labs?
So the more specific a job description is, the better we can shape the laboratory professional. So if you have a general job description. And perhaps there are general job descriptions for certain types of positions. So perhaps for a qualified med tech, there might be a general job description. Perhaps for a senior med tech, there are other general job descriptions. Perhaps for a manager, there will be others, for the lab assistant, and so on. So there might be some initial general tasks and duties that they are required to carry out, but then depending on the lab that they are working in, there will be specific tasks, and those specific tasks will need to be written in their job description. So for example, if somebody is working in the hematology laboratory, then there's not going to be anything in their job description about them doing molecular testing for meningitis, because it's not appropriate and it's not needed. But it would be very important in the job description for them to be able to be trained and deemed competent in being able to use the automated analyzer, and to be able to process the samples, and to be able to interpret results, and to run QCs and interpret the QCs, and to participate in the EQA program for hematology, and how do the reports get reported, and those step-by-step mini tasks might be very different from working in another laboratory.
So there's a follow-up to that, Kim, from Regina. Some institutions normally ask the staff to do their job descriptions. Is that the correct approach, to have the staff actually write their own job description?
I'm laughing because I'm just imagining if everybody wrote their own job descriptions, what would they write? I apologize if I'm laughing, but it is quite funny for me. My answer is no. We can't really write our own job descriptions. However, if we are given a job description, I think we are certainly within our rights, and we should review our job description so that the job description is actually matching the specific duties and tasks that I am doing. If my job description does not match that, then I need to meet with my lab manager and say, well, you know, in my job description, it says A, B, and C, but in actual fact, I'm doing D, E, and E. So can we please, can you review and can we revise this job description? So definitely we do have a role to play. We need to understand our job description, and if we don't agree with it, or if it changes, our job description can also change over time, and perhaps it's not reflected in our job description. Then, of course, that job description needs to be reviewed and revised.
Yeah, yeah, Kim, I agree with you 100%. I think one of the interesting things that in my limited dealing with personnel, one of the things that I found very valuable is when someone does have a job description, that prior to their annual review or appraisal or anything, is that you ask them, or if they are, you know, asking for a promotion or want to be considered for a promotion, is that you have them review their job description, preferably with tracked changes in a Word document, so that they can actually do exactly what you said, update what they're actually doing, so that you can look at that and say, you know, is this person being overworked? Are they being underworked? Has their position significantly changed? Do they deserve a promotion? You know, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you can't, as a manager, you can't do that without having that direct input from them. And obviously, if they, if they put something down and they're not doing it, that's a different issue, right? That's a different management issue. But from the point of view of trying to keep up with so many employees, especially when you have a whole lab full, I find it very helpful to do that, to have people actually not necessarily amend, but update with track changes so you can see exactly what they feel their job description looks like, and then you can decide what to do from there. I think it's a really important step, but not the initial job description, right? Because that would be kind of challenging. A really good question. Actually, we have a lot of good questions. Here's one that's come up: is how should a lab manager treat a situation where a new hire performs well during interviews and poor in competency tests?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So obviously, if the new hire scored very well during the interview, then they would have ticked all the different boxes in terms of qualifications and experience, and they would appear to be the right person for the job. And then, of course, they would go through their orientation, and they would have their training, and then they would have their competency. I think we'd have to examine what the poor competency areas are. So if a person is being competency assessed for running a bilirubin test in chemistry, and they're getting poor results, and then you notice, well, actually, when they make up their reagents, it's supposed to be kept in the dark, but they left it out on the bench, and so the person then will get reassessed in a month or so, and check, is the competency now improving. We also have to look at the training. Who is providing the training? Are they themselves competent to provide the training? Are they providing adequate training?
I'm sorry, Kim, there was a bit of a lag. Keep going, you're fine.
Poor competency, is it just an area? Sorry, so, when you assess the competency, is it poor in just one area that can be managed and addressed? Or is it generally poor? Does the person just not have the ability to be able to do the job? So I think you'd have to really thoroughly investigate everything from the training all the way to the competency. And then there would need to be refresher training. And if the refresher training is not helping, then you've got a deeper problem. And yeah, that is a problem. I don't know. I would really like to say that most areas where people are not deemed competent is because either they haven't been trained adequately, or they're still not very confident in what they are doing, and they need some more hand-holding, they need more supervision, and maybe refresher training. And 99% of the time that will resolve the competency issues. If you think after all of this that you've got the wrong person for the job, then again, I think at that stage, when you've exhausted all of your own avenues with training and competency, I would take that issue to your human resource department and start having discussions with them about what your next steps should be. So again, when you feel like you've explored all of your options and you still don't get a good result, don't think that this ends with you. It doesn't. There are always channels and procedures to follow. So we don't always have to carry the burden on our shoulders.
Great, Kim, we're gonna do one more question and then let you go into your case. So there were three very similar related questions, so I'm gonna kind of paraphrase them. So it's for appraisals, is there a need to set targets? And if yes, how do you go about doing that? And more specifically, do the staff write their own performance objectives, or does a manager do that? Again, for things like, increased volumes, publish an article, reduce turnaround times. So in other words, for the appraisals or the targets for individual staff, how do you go about doing that, and who writes those?
That's a good question. And I think that goes back to appraisals are very much a two-way street. It isn't just managers, it isn't just the person. It's a two-way. So in some cases, the manager would possibly like to set targets. Let's say, for example, for TB smears, WHO says, we should be able to read, can't remember how many it is a day, maybe it's 15 or 20 a day. And Kim is only reading 10 a day. Is there any way that we can improve on your time, so that we can reset your target from reading 10 smears a day to 15 smears a day? And every time a target is set or an objective is set, it has to be agreed by both parties. So I have to be willing to perhaps speed up a little bit. Maybe I can find some areas where I'm wasting my time. Maybe I'm not that punctual, so I'm not able to read 15 a day, whatever it is. But both parties, the manager and the staff member being appraised, must always agree to all targets and all objectives. And then in other cases, then it might be the staff member, it's him or herself that sets a target or an objective. Perhaps this is a motivated staff member who wants to take on a laboratory quality improvement project, and they have this idea. Then there will be certain objectives that would be laid out, and the manager and the staff member would then agree together on this project, and they would agree on different milestones perhaps for this project. So it definitely works both ways.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. So I think you can go ahead and do your case. And then when we get to the end of your case, we'll have some additional questions that will go from there. And I believe Emily's going to help you with those. So go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. And thank you so much for all your questions. You've really challenged me today. And I hope I've been able to answer the questions adequately. So let's go back to this scenario that I showed right at the very beginning. And we have read it. Let me see what the time is. Yeah, I'm going to give you just a few minutes in case you haven't had time to go through this case study. It's not particularly difficult. And let's see if you can jot down some solutions to how you would address this immediately, and what would you do to address it so that in future the same scenario does not occur. So I'll just give you a few minutes to do that.
And if you'd like to share your thoughts, you can type them to the panelists using the chat box on the lower left-hand side of the screen.
Okay, so let's look at this scenario. Let's discuss first of all what would be the immediate action that we would need to take. Well, obviously we are now sitting with 20 smears that we are not able to test, and it says we have to notify the requesters. So how do we even do this? Do we do this by phone? Do we do it in person by going to the ward? Do we send out an email? How do we go about doing this? And however we go about doing this should be written in an SOP, and whatever we do needs to be documented. So if we phone the wards or phone the clinics, then we need to fill in a little record that says who phoned, which wards, when, to inform them that there will be a delay in the malaria testing. Then does it stop there? Because now we are sitting with 20 malaria smears. And the answer to this, hopefully, will be no. Because as we know, every laboratory should have a backup plan for testing of samples. And the smart laboratories make friends with their neighboring laboratories, so that if any of each other gets in trouble, then they agree to help each other. Ideally, this would be done formally and have that relationship written in writing. And then that backup plan can be implemented. Again, this should be written in the SOP. And if the samples then can be sent to the neighboring laboratory and they can be tested, and then the delay is maybe only hours rather than days. Of course, when you're you also have to say, please don't send any more samples to us until we get back to you with another notice to say that our services are now running as usual. Then looking at what is going on with the staff themselves, I see that we've got 2 senior technologists that are competent in doing this test, and one of them has been reassigned to another laboratory. So already there's a problem here, because what is our own backup? If that person has been reassigned, we only have one person who is competent in doing the testing. So as a lab manager, I would not readily allow any other lab to take a member of my staff, especially if I can justify that they are needed in my lab. So I wouldn't let them go without a fight. I know sometimes we don't have a say in these things, and this is where the second part of this scenario will come into play. But you know, as a lab manager, we also have to sometimes learn that we don't always have to say yes. We can say no, and if we deem it fit for the quality of our testing services, then we need to have the strength to be able to speak up, even if we are not heard at the end. So the other senior technologist is sick. Now we've got 2 folks left, and they haven't read malaria smears since several years ago when they had their initial training. So of course, here we need to make sure that we put a competency assessment program in place. It might mean that we first need to write an SOP on competency assessments, and then perhaps to develop a schedule for doing competency assessments and using the standardized format. How do we do this competency assessment? Are we going to watch them from collecting the sample to reading the smear, or are we going to watch them do an EQA panel, depending on what the SOP says? And so we need to have competency assessment schedule in place, and this schedule needs to be reoccurring. So remember, we said competency assessment is not a one-off. It needs to be done on a regular basis, and more often than not in quality manuals and SOPs, I see it as once a year, or sometimes once every 2 years. This also goes back to cross-training that we mentioned earlier on. And this is one of the ways of making sure that your lab is able to run effectively and efficiently. And that is if your staff are trained in multiple areas, and that they are not just stuck in one specific area. And one way of doing this is to, of course, rotate your staff. So that maybe 1 month somebody is working on malaria smears, your 2 people, and then the next month, then maybe they move on to TB, and maybe the TB folks are moving on to something else. But you can work out a rotation program as long as your staff are trained and deemed currently competent. Their competency is up to date. So these are just some of the things, and I'm sure that you've come up with some additional items, and I would love to hear them if you have anything additional to add to this, please.
Thanks so much, Kim. This is Emily. We did have a few folks contribute to the chat, and there was one that I was hoping you might address. So a couple people had suggested that the lab manager themselves help with performing the smears. Can you speak to that as sort of the lab manager stepping in these acute situations as a solution, both in the short term and long term, and how sustainable that is?
And that, I think, is a very good question. The lab manager, let's remember that a lab manager is not competent or has not been deemed competent, in fact, might not even be trained in some or many of the tests. And what we say as part of our quality policy is that a staff member must be trained and deemed competent to carry out a specific task. So if the lab manager has not been trained and is not currently deemed competent in malaria smears, then my answer would be no. If they have been trained and deemed competent within the last year, then I would say good on the lab manager, roll up your sleeve, get into the lab and help out with those malaria smears. Otherwise not.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Emily.
Thank you so much. And yeah, most of the other feedback were sort of in line with what you had explained. Having people do more rotating through the lab, training the other technologists to do the malaria slides, etc. Did you have anything else to add to the scenario? Otherwise, we had a few more questions that we didn't address before you launched into the scenario that we could go to.
Okay, well, I think this scenario is quite straightforward, but as we've gone through it, I hope everybody realizes that it's linked to many different managerial duties, and that goes from having a policy in your quality manual for backups and having SOPs, what to do, and really looking at your staff and maintaining the training and competency, the cross training, having schedules, rotating schedules, and so on. And these are all managerial tasks that we should be doing on a routine basis in any case. So thank you very much for that. And sure, are there any more questions?
Sure. Yeah, I can. Actually, I did have one more thought about the scenario. What are your thoughts about one of the panels had suggested orienting the two remaining technologists who had not read malaria smears in their initial training. What are your thoughts about doing that type of training in this sort of acute setting when they have not undergone the kind of annual or regular review and competency assessment?
And that is a very good question. And as laboratory managers and staff, we are put under enormous pressure to get results out. And we want to do that. We want to be able to do all the tests and to get our results out. But we must be careful about being reactive without actually thinking things through. And so when we have a situation in the lab, as a manager, we need to be able to stand back for a moment and go, okay, maybe I could quickly train up these people and deem them competent in the next hour. But then really, can we really do that in an effective way within a stressful environment? And the answer to that is really no. And it's like, it's a knee-jerk reaction kind of solution. It's how we would act if we were trying to put out a fire. And in this case, it's not going to serve us well, because really I would question the competency of these folks that I have just, under an emergency situation, trained them. They are now feeling very conscious and maybe not comfortable and maybe stressed in this kind of environment, which is really not conducive for providing quality results. I think if anything, we're setting up the laboratory to make mistakes, and those mistakes can cost the patient and the lab dearly. So no.
Great, thank you so much. All right, well, maybe we can move to the remaining questions. So there was a couple questions that were somewhat related to who is appointed to the role of it, like a QMS manager in a lab. So what type of qualities are you looking for? What level should they be within the sort of laboratory hierarchy? And then as a follow-up question to that, folks who are appointed to a quality management system role, but in a laboratory where there has not been a lot of infrastructure put into that role, how can they sort of get the lab caught up without impacting their new colleagues?
Okay, so the first question is related to the competency assessment. Who does the competency assessments? Is that right, Emily?
Yeah. So how do managers deal with like appointments and key responsibilities in QMS?
Oh, okay. So not competency assessment. This is all to do with. Okay. So I do understand that in medium to small laboratories, there will not be a full-time quality officer, but there would be a quality officer assigned, and they would conduct quality duties as per their job description. Now, if you are working in a lab that has not really established a QMS system, and if you are a quality officer where you have been placed in this role and you do not have your own experience in QMS, then one of the first things I would say is that the quality officer, there are, I think on the WHO website, or if not, I can certainly provide it. It's a list of generic quality duties for a quality officer in a medium to small laboratory. So if anybody's interested in that, I can always send it across, and Emily and the team can send it out. So at least the quality officer must agree to be a quality officer, and that should be a signed document, and with a list of the quality officer duties. All quality officers should be trained in QMS. So this course that we are doing now, all quality officers should be trained in this type of course. More than that, the quality officer should then also be able to train other staff on QMS. So once the quality officer feels confident and has the knowledge and is developing the skills and expertise, then certainly they need to train everybody in the lab. Everybody in the lab should be trained on quality management systems, because quality management systems should not only fall on the shoulders of the quality officer. And we see this time and time again in labs where there's a quality officer, and the quality officer is establishing and building the quality management system, but the rest of the laboratory really have no idea what quality management is all about. There is that. And I would also say that if it is a lab where the QMS system has not been established, that a very good starting point with the quality officer is to form a team and to draft the quality manual and policy. Because the QMS is, all aspects of the QMS is actually going to come out of the quality manual. All the processes, all the procedures, all the SOPs, they are all going to come out of the quality manual. So I'm not sure if I've answered that question adequately. I'm happy to take another stab if there's another question.
Yeah, and maybe as a follow-up, does the quality officer, do they need to come from like a specific level within the lab, or can anyone within the lab become a quality officer if they're motivated and have demonstrated an interest in learning more about QMS?
Absolutely. It doesn't necessarily have to be a senior a senior person. It often is, but it doesn't mean that it must be. What's important is that the person sees quality as being extremely important in the lab, that they show an interest in it, and that they are motivated, because it's quite a big undertaking. And sometimes quality officers don't, when we talk about motivation, quality officers also often have to go that extra mile, and they are not always recognized and praised for the good work that they do. But quality officers can be chosen from any level.
Great, thank you so much. And maybe we have a little bit more time left. Maybe we can get to a couple more questions. So I'm not sure I'm capturing this question correctly. So the panelists who put it forward, please correct me if through the Q&A if I misrepresent anything. But I think the gist of the question is there a way to see your personnel documents if you feel that maybe your supervisor has been careless in putting them together, or if you feel like you've gotten maybe negative feedback that was unjust? Is there a way to see what's been written about you in your personnel documents and had some recourse to deal with that?
So when we mentioned in the presentation that personnel files are confidential, who should have access to your personnel file? Most definitely yourself. It is all about you. The personnel file is all about you. So you must be allowed access. And in fact, sometimes you have to remove the personnel file if you need to update your training documents, or if you want to add that you've received a vaccine or something like that. The personnel file, you must definitely have access to that. As well as the manager, and that's probably about it. But I hope that there are, gosh, this is the first time I'm hearing this, and I hope it doesn't happen that people do not have access to their own personnel files. I would definitely follow up on that. You should have access to your own files, not to anybody else's, but certainly to your own.
Thank you, Kim. And yeah, if the person who asked that question, if you want to further clarify, please feel free. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, and we had one question about accreditation, and that once labs have attained accreditation, there might be a slight reduction in laboratory personnel sustaining that accreditation. What are some things that management can do to maybe keep morale up and motivation up to make sure that the accreditation standards are maintained in an affordable way?
Right. And this is a question that comes up time and time again. You know, we've reached accreditation, or we're 5 stars on the SLPTR, and you know, we want to go for accreditation now, and then suddenly something happens and the quality dips. So first of all, we have to emphasize and adopt a culture of quality in the laboratory. And we are still saying the same thing that we were saying 10, 15 years ago. And that is that quality activities in the laboratory are part of our routine activities, they should not be seen as additional work or extra activities or a burden that we have to carry out. They really have to be incorporated into the core of the laboratory's being. So quality activities are nothing extra. They are part of our work, part of our activities. If everybody in the lab believes that and they adhere to that, then the standards of that lab cannot drop. But if quality, remember at the beginning when I was introducing myself and I said quality is in my blood. If it is not in their blood, then the quality officer needs, and the manager together, need to think of creative ways for this culture of quality to occur, and how they can best bring this about. Additional trainings, watching videos on quality, watching videos, what happens when there is no quality in the lab, having discussions during staff meetings about quality, and making quality one of our agenda items on our staff meetings all the time, so that everybody begins to know that, you know, quality is foremost. Every time we have a staff meeting, we're talking something about quality, so that it's not seen as extra work, additional work. That is when the standards will drop.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we just had a couple more questions related to personnel management, and maybe this one might be best if you have if you're able to share some resources, Kim, and we can put on the site. So kind of general qualifications for a lab manager. It seems like a pretty broad topic. I don't know if you have some resources, written resources we could share related to that.
I can see what I can dig up from some of the countries that I've worked in, and see. So they are wanting a general job description or a list of duties.
It wasn't that specific. Kind of maybe general qualifications for a lab manager.
Oh, general qualifications. So qualifications of a lab manager, they come in all sorts of different forms, depending again on the policy of the country and what they are looking for with qualifications. Now, in some countries, you can become a lab manager by working your way up the ladder, so to speak. So you start as the bench worker, and then you're a supervisor, and then you become a lab manager. In some laboratories, they stipulate the policy is that a lab manager should have a degree. In some cases, for a very large laboratory, perhaps a national laboratory, in some cases, they will say that lab managers should have a master's or a PhD. And so it will vary from country to country what the qualifications should be and what the process for becoming a lab manager is. Yeah. What's this?
Okay, great.
I can say on that.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Kim. That was very helpful. It was such a nice review of personnel management. Did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to share?
Only that it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I've worked in so many countries, and I wonder if any of the participants today might even be folks that I know or I've met or I have worked with. It's possible, you know, the lab world is small. I also really would like to applaud the participants for enrolling in a course like this, which is probably not mandatory that you have enrolled in this course, and it's probably been an option that you have chosen to do, and that in itself tells me that you are motivated. So the fact that you are doing this, I do applaud you. I hope that you've received something out of this session, and thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for all of your questions. This really makes me feel good. I do really feel like you've been paying attention to this session, and your questions were spot on, very appropriate and challenging. And finally, I would also like to thank ASCP and Pathologists Abroad for putting on this stunning course. It really is quite exceptional. And thank you for inviting me. And I would also make myself available. So if there are any participants who would like some additional information or who would like to just reach out to me and ask me any questions, I'm certainly open to that. And you will be able to get my email address through Pathologists Abroad and the organizers of this course. So thank you very much for your attention. And that is it from me. Thank you. Thank you, Emily.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
Kim. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Thanks so much, Kim and Emily and Ken. And this is our last session for this week. We will start again on Tuesday with our next session, and look for the registration for that on Sunday evening. Thank you so much, and we'll see you then.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.